Hey guys, welcome to the next video of my series on owner building, getting your own drawings and plans done. If you haven't seen the last ones, there's a whole playlist. The links will be in the description as well. Go check them out, start from the beginning, definitely worth it. But in this video, I'm going to be talking about building rules consent, the next stage after planning consent, and how to get that, what's involved, all of those sorts of things. If you don't know, I'm Ziv from Lifehack Yarns. My channel's all about doing things yourself, whether it's traveling, building your own home, building AI agents, whatever it may be. I've had a bit of a hiatus, but I'm back into it now. So yeah, keen to get into this episode. So, building rules consent. This is always a fun one. It typically goes much quicker than planning consent, as you can often engage a private certifier rather than the council that issued the planning consent. The private certifier or the council or whatever authority that you choose that does the building rules consent is basically there to check that what you've designed meets the current standards, whether that's the Australian standards or the National Construction Code or any other ministerial building standards that there may be in your specific state, set out by the building governor or whatever, the minister for housing. There may be additional caveats, but typically it's mainly the Australian standards and the National Construction Code. So while planning consent focused on the external of the building, a bit how it looked, how it was sited on the land, building rules really is the nuts and bolts of it, how it's put together, that it is compliant to all these different standards. It's safe to live in, safe to occupy, so on and so forth. So once planning is achieved, you'll want to engage a few of the key subcontractors you're going to need. There's a few key pieces of documentation for your plans to be assessed for building rules consent, and the main one here is engineering. Now this may not just be one type of engineering, which typically is structural. There might be fire engineering involved, further wastewater engineering. Sometimes that's assessed as well in planning, but it'll be assessed again in building rules consent. There may be acoustic engineering involved if you've got some sort of accommodation that you're building where you've got intertenancy units and all of this. So the engineers are the key subcontractor here. I would get them engaged even earlier. Look, here's our designs. This is what's going for planning. They have some lead times like any subcontractor. And then once you got the planning, you know that the form is as it's going to be. You can send off to engineering and they're going to engineer your slab. This is typically, unless you're an engineer yourself, something that you won't be able to do yourself at all. They're going to want proper engineering, proper soil reports, wind zone classifications. If, say, you're a carpenter, you might be able to do a timber framing design to AS 1684, which is the timber framing code, and they might, the private certifier might accept that. Or if you have some other specialist skill, you might be able to get it done. If you're really tech savvy and can just design everything to the Australian standards, you might have to just disclose that to the private certifier, have a chat with them. They might let you do it and you just read the Australian standard cover to cover, whether it's for footings, masonry, timber framing, and then you design the house basically out of the Australian standard. That's practically what engineers do as well to reduce their liability. They often, I find in residential, just design to the Australian standards, which is ridiculous sometimes because often as designers and builders, we want innovative solutions, right? We want to minimize the amount of concrete we need to put in a footing. And then the engineer just comes along and does a footing to Australian standard and you're like, well, isn't this potentially over-engineered? You haven't really checked the numbers, have you? So anyway, I might be giving engineers a little bit of extra grief, but I've had literal situations where engineers have gone to me, what you've done here is out of the scope of the Australian standard that we've designed to, so now we're going to throw the book at you So I know for a fact they often do just design to Australian standard, but there's a lot of things like truss manufacture. They're designing with special truss programs, everything like that. So engineer, super important for building rules consent. You want your structural engineering done as a minimum. And then sometimes a manufactured product will come with its own engineering. I'm just trying to think of a situation where you could get away with building a whole house like that. Say there was a SIPS manufacturer that had all the floors already engineered, walls and roofs, all in a panelised system. It might be the case where they have enough documentation that you could just pass that on to the certifier and get that certified. This might also be the case with something like a wastewater treatment system, where the supplier that supplies the wastewater treatment system will already have some engineering done for different soil types and how that wastewater is dispersed over the land, that you might not need to get it specifically engineered. So there are other caveats where you might be able to find a deemed to satisfy solution from the existing manufacturer's engineering. And sometimes, like sheds, the design has been handled like people are putting sheds up every day, and their shed design has been engineered 20 times, like it's basically standardized, where the shed manufacturer will just provide his own engineering for any soil type, any wind classification, and you can basically hand that shed quote / documentation / engineering package straight to the certifier if you're just getting a shed built on your land, and they'll stamp those plans. You are unlikely to need specific engineering. The private certifier might then go, well, have you got a soil report for your specific land so that we know that it actually aligns what they've done in the shed engineering actually suits your soil type. And then you might need to engage a soil sampler or an engineer to get that soil sample. So there are caveats in amongst the engineering and what types of engineering and what some manufacturers provide with their product and what they don't. So there might be a little bit of digging you have to do on what's available so you can get the cost down as much as possible. But typically for a new home, you're looking at least all the footings and structural engineering for the system that you've designed to, whether it's timber frame, steel framed. It hurts me to say that. Don't build steel framed homes. But yeah, you want timber framing, steel framing, truss designs, all of that to ship off to the private certifier. Apart from engineering, you do have to finalise, we talked about it, pre-planning consent, your energy assessment. It's good to get a preliminary or most of the energy assessment done before planning, because it can affect how windows are located and how the performance of the home, basically reduce your energy costs, because you can in winter allow more sunlight in. And that is better optimized earlier before planning, because planning, they're assessing where the windows are, and once planning's achieved, you don't want to be moving windows. But then you need to get it certified. And really most NatHERS, that's the framework we work to in Australia. Most NatHERS assessors will only stamp a set of plans when they're practically complete. So just before building rules consent, when you've got everything in your plans, you've likely got your engineering back, although often the NatHERS framework doesn't assess thermal bridges. Hopefully that comes in. But let's say they put a whole bunch of steel in and they do assess thermal bridges, which they should, then the energy assessor might want to know that. So it's good to have a fairly full set of documents before you get it stamped off by the energy assessor. And that also forms part of the package. Now, you don't need the energy assessment. There's certain caveats where, say, if you're doing an addition that only increases your footprint by a small amount, say, I don't know the actual amount, so don't quote me on this, but say it's 20%, it's likely not going to trigger the need for an energy assessment. regardless, I'd do it, because at the end of the day, you're living in your home for many years, and if you can get it optimized, you're saving money, and so in the long term it'll easily pay you back. So I would definitely get it done regardless, but you may not need it, and there may be some instances where you can get certain discounts or go to older codes. I don't know how that works, because we always go with the latest and the best energy efficiency, but your energy assessor will know what the go is for your particular design. And yeah, you need to have that energy assessment stamped and those plans stamped alongside the energy assessment, and that forms part of the building rules consent. And then the builder, the specification that's in that energy assessment, the builder is legally obliged to install all that stuff. So it forms part of the contract at the end of the day as well to the builder. But if you own a building, you need to know that everything that's in it realistically has to go in. So if he's specified R7 insulation in your ceiling, you have to put that R7 insulation in the ceiling. Otherwise, as built doesn't match as modelled, and you could be non-compliant, right? Now, another piece of information the certifier needs, at least here, definitely here in South Australia, but I think it's nationwide, is your CITB levy. So it's I think it's 0.25% of estimated build cost, and that basically goes to training. We're short-staffed in the construction industry, right? And so the CITB, Construction Industry Training Board, if I do a course, often they subsidise my courses. I've got a card where I prove I'm working for a building company, and as long as I maintain my employment with that building company, I maintain this card, and then I get access to a certain amount of reimbursement per year for professional development, and that helps with, apprenticeships are cheaper, everything. The CITB reimburses a lot of costs for further professional development and to just get started in the construction industry. So there's a levy you have to pay. So let's say you have a $1 million project, 0.25% of that is $2,500 that you have to pay to this CITB levy. From the point of getting that DA, where you've assessed both the planning and the building rules consent, you usually have 3 years to build in South Australia at the moment anyway. So as an owner builder, you might go, yep, it's going to be 3 years to build. Otherwise, you might go, well, my builder's contracted to build within a year, it's going to be a year, and you set the end date for CITB, and you set the estimated project cost, which maybe you got estimation done, maybe you have a builder on board, and maybe you're just doing an Excel spreadsheet and doing it yourself. But you've got to somehow estimate how much it's going to cost to build it and tell them that number. Then at the end of whatever that estimated period, CITB is actually going to chase you up and go, how much did it actually cost to build? And maybe it was a lot less and you get a bit of a refund on the levy, or maybe it was more and you have to pay a little bit more. So while you should estimate as closely as you can, it doesn't really matter. You pay the difference or get reimbursed the difference at the end of the day. So just try to be as truthful as you can, as you should always be in your life, on that cost, if not a bit conservative, because things always blow out. And then, you pay that CITB levy fee, and then you get a statement of payment or a receipt that you also have to hand as part of the package to the private certifier to prove that you've paid that levy. Now, I know it's definitely mandatory in South Australia, and it's mandatory for project values over $100,000, I believe. Check on the CITB website what it is at the time. This is me going off my current knowledge, which might not be up to date, and it may change into the future. So check just on the CITB website. And your private certifier, if you haven't put that information together, when you submit the document package to the certifier or to the council for building rules consent, they'll request the missing items anyway. All it means is it takes longer, right? Because instead of you handing them the full document package with all of your ducks in a row, you now have to go pay for that levy, send it to them, they table it on the back of their project list. And anyway, so I like to have everything set up and just push it through to the certifier as required. And then apart from that, it's really your documentation package. It can be as minimal as possible. Some people can get away with just specifying. Somewhere, the certifier wants to see a specification list, like what are you building to? And that way it's in writing, not just assume that you're building to all the latest Australian standards. It is in writing that you're building to all these standards. So there's standard ones you can just buy from master builders, HIA. It's called like a building works specification. Actually, hold the thought. I might be able to find one for you to look at. Found it. So this was a hard copy from back in the day that I purchased. We don't do hard copies really anymore because we have a contract builder, but this is what it looks like. And in it is just all the different, I don't know if you can read that, but here it says for lintels, you know, what the schedule is. Eaves, you know, minimum 4.5 millimetre fibre cement is the minimum standard that you can go to, and it just goes through everything. And now this is a standard specification document. Some architects have their own because they build to a better standard, or they want to specify zero VOC paints throughout the house, or they want to specify no arsenic in their treated timbers. It could be anything, right? So the certifier will want a set of specifications. Sometimes all that spec is on the drawings, and typically architects have a whole page at the start that lists a whole bunch of spec. That can be interpolated. Maybe some of the engineering stuff is put in there. There might be some other project relevant, say if you're building in a certain bushfire attack level rating, like BAL 29, they might have BAL 29 notes in there. They wouldn't typically be in this specification document. So apart from a standard specification, which covers everything, there might be some specification on top of that, which is on the documents. And all of that can be written, which is fine, but as an owner builder or as a builder, we like to see details. So it is better if you have a few pages where everything is detailed out. Like you might have in your specification, wet area waterproofing to Australian standard, and in that Australian standard are the details for what happens, you know, waterproofing in a shower area. But the architect might go, I'm going to put some details in as well, like what happens, you know, with a bath lip on a bath hob or something like that, because we have a bath here, and then it's really right in front of your eyes, and you don't, because Australian standards are still gate kept, so to speak. You have to pay for them. Hopefully they're making them free soon, but free to view at least, not free to own and, you know, do with what you will, but free to view. Hopefully that happens. We'll see. It can be hard for subcontractors who don't have all the standards to know what to do, and builders and stuff, especially owner builders, right? And so having all that detailed out as much as you can is really, really good asset. And so then the private certifier is also looking through all those details. If you don't have those details, they'll be looking at your specification and relying more on your specification. And in my opinion, that just allows for more ambiguity because I'm going to send this specification document off to every subcontractor I quote. Well, I do, but you know what I mean. If you're owner building it, it's much easier to view those details on a page. Now as well, the engineer might have a footing drawn a certain way, or but it's just in a schedule, you know, this footing is 600 by 400 with a toe. Let's say it's a retaining wall footing and it has a toe. It might be nice, rather than having that in a schedule in the engineering, to put that into a section drawing and a detail to see if that toe conflicts with a pool or a staircase or something else, so that there's no clashes. And then when you come to site and go, I've got to build this retaining wall, you can really see, the toe is facing this way. There's less interpolation that you have to do in your own mind because it's all in the details. So it is great to have a whole bunch of details as part of the documentation and detailing everything out, getting somebody in who knows what they're doing to detail it out, or getting some standardized details from somewhere where you go, in the design, I want to build it to this detail, like my eave meeting to the wall. This is how I want to build it with a ventilated facade. At least you have a detail there then, rather than just a clause on the document, eave details to be as per this and this document by this and this architect. It's much nicer to have the whole details, but as long as it's written, often certifiers will accept it. You can get away with a very low set of docs as long as the certifier sees that everything is checked off, you know, that somewhere in writing it is written that you have to waterproof the wet areas to the current Australian standard. They're likely, depending on the certifier, to be happy with that. But once again, it is better to have some details drawn up about all these things, like how the puddle flange sits in and how there should be no ponding, no lip on the puddle flange and all of that. That can easily be drawn, and then it really is, if there's something non-compliant, it's really easy to point the finger at it and go, here's the plans, you know, this is how it should be, and there's no room for discussion or argument on site. So yeah, then you submit it all to the private certifier. Depending on how busy they are, you'll get a result back and you should get a set of stamped plans. They will then send a set of conditions as well. Sometimes it's not many. If you have a whole lot of really good drawings and everything's written correctly, but they might set a set of conditions in there as well, depending on what they found. And then the document package plus the decision notification form on the building rules consent, which is like the decision notification form on the planning, and then at the development approval stage, it all gets wrapped into one big decision notification form, will be a set of sub-clauses. Sometimes it's like no silt runoff from site onto the road, right? Because it got missed somewhere, and the private certifier is really stringent on that. The private certifier also at that stage sets out a schedule of mandatory building inspections, and that is up to their discretion practically. They probably have rules on what they're meant to and not meant to do as part of whatever state you're in, but typically there's footing inspections, framing inspections, wet area inspections, completion inspections, and if you have like high-risk infrastructure like firefighting equipment, they'll want to inspect that those things got installed before the occupant moves in. So they set out those conditions, and then you have to call up for an inspection when those conditions are met. Like you've completed the framing, you have to call up, or your builder calls up, the council or the relevant authority. It could even be the private certifier themselves to perform that inspection, depending on where you're located. So that's basically building rules consent in a large nutshell. And then from there, development approval is typically just a rubber stamp exercise where they compare the two. The planning consent, let's say in building rules consent, because of the engineering you had to drastically move a window, then council will say, oh, it doesn't match the planning consent. How does it affect it? Do we have to reassess, do a minor variation, or does it still roughly meet all the requirements that were originally in there. Like, he hasn't made the house twice as big, he's just moved a window around. Okay, we'll let it through. And it's roughly consistent, and that final set of documentation forms the development approval, and you're good to start building from development approval. Yeah, so that's it. That, I guess, concludes that series on getting through the design phase of owner building and trying to do as much of it as you can yourself. That last stage really is a lot of getting somebody else to do it, because it involves subcontractors that you can't really do without, specifically the engineer and the private certifier. And yeah, I hope to continue this series with some other owner builder tips for during construction. In particular, we'll probably elaborate on like contracts and how to manage subcontractors as an owner builder, and doing build yourself as a first get-go, because after the planning paperwork and the design and having done all that, it's really getting quotes and contracts in place to deliver the project. So it'll be about the next episodes. I don't know exactly the structure, but how to get good pricing from big suppliers, timber suppliers, whatever, how to set up subcontract agreements. I might even provide templates to my viewers that you can use if you're doing owner-builder projects. How to engage a nominated supervisor officially, what to look for, you know, how often are they on site, all those sorts of things. So yeah, keep staying tuned. Thanks for the viewers who have been commenting and liking this little series. It has been doing pretty well, actually. And if you like this sort of content and you haven't yet already, hit like and subscribe. I'm slowly building the channel, and I'm probably never going to stop. So if you're here on in these early years and for all these early episodes, thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers, guys.